Are you tired of wasting your time on print-related tickets? PrinterLogic offers a centralized, cloud-native, IP-based print management system. Dump your print servers and discover the future of print management with PrinterLogic. Find out more and get a free 30-day trial at printerlogic.com/packetpushers.
Hello, I'm Johna Till Johnson. I'm the CEO of Nemertes, and I'm here with my co-host and longtime friend, John Burke, who is the CTO of Nemertes. And you are listening to Heavy Strategies, the show that tries to ask the right questions instead of force-feeding you the right answers, or the air quotes right answers. Today, we're going to be talking about the role of IT as it pertains to business. I think there's been a lot of talk about how IT needs to align with business, and I'm not sure I agree with that. So that's what we're going to be talking about. A lot of times I hear that IT's role is to align with the business. In other words, IT is kind of like an executive assistant. It's trying to figure out where the business is going and be super helpful, serving up whatever it takes to make the business get there. And realistically, that makes sense because, philosophically, technology should be at the service of the organization it's part of. But I'm going to take the opposite stance today. I really think that technology has become so important to almost every organization that idea of IT being closely aligned with yet a step behind, following the business is not quite right. I think technologists and organizations need to actually be leading the business. That's, again, because IT is central to both the execution and the capabilities of what the business can be doing. And it really needs to be opening businesses' eyes on an ongoing basis to what some of the possibilities are. John, you're a CTO. What do you think about that?
Well, I am always mindful of the fact that the folks who gravitate towards a career in technology typically gravitate towards that career because they don't want to be business people and maybe don't have the personalities that best suit them to being business people. Also, though, I think that there's probably going to be a need to unmuddy the waters here about what we mean by lead, because it seemed to me that talking about leading the business is talking about making the decisions about where the priorities are for the business, making the priorities about which parts of the business get to expand, which parts of the business don't get to, and where you do business, what regions you move into, what lines of business you move into. And making the decisions is different from having input into the decisions and even, generating the ideas that decisions get made about. So I think I wouldn't have any problem saying IT leadership need a seat at the table because they're going to be a source of those ideas in such a technologically dominated period in the business world. But that's not the same thing as saying that they're leading the business.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would say IT should be in charge of everything unless you actually are a technology company. So yes, I was being deliberately provocative and exaggerating, but I think there's a fine line between IT needs to align with the business, be at the table, offer input, which all to me sounds somewhat passive. I think it's essential that IT step up and start framing the problems. And maybe, you resonated when you said, look, should they be making all the decisions? And what that would imply is that the CIO should be the CEO. And I think most CIOs would agree with you that they don't want to be CEOs. If they had wanted to be CEOs, they would have done something else in their lives.
Right.
And also historically, the path to CEO from CIO is very lightly trod. Very few people make that. Some do, but it's really, you'd be better off being chief legal, chief operations, even chief of HR. You're not going to get there from technology. So totally agree with your point that most CIOs don't want to be CEOs. But that said, I think framing the problems is at least 80% towards solving them. And I think there's a big difference between sitting down at the table and saying, look, guys, AI has just eviscerated our entire business. So here's how I propose we make changes. Slash headcount here, beef up the headcount over there, expand over here. this is my recommendation for making the business go forward, because if you don't, you'll be in a world of hurt. That's a much more aggressive, proactive stance than simply waiting to be asked. And Johna, what do you think AI is going to do to the business?
I cannot argue with the idea that leadership and IT need to be more assertive, need to be more visible, need to be even, I think, as you're characterizing it, aggressive about putting forward the things that other parts of business leadership are maybe turning a blind eye to or unable yet to see as threats to the business or opportunities for the business to pursue. Whether that means you're forsaking alignment for something else, I kind of disagree. I mean, you're still, at the end of the day, being the IT department that the business needs, even if you're putting forward the ideas that the rest of the business leadership are going to be deciding get pursued. You're not the one making those decisions. And so yeah, I think IT has not just an opportunity, but an obligation to be stepping up like that. But it's stepping up in service of service, if you will. It's leading by serving, which is, a whole thing out there somewhere in the world of leadership philosophies, leading by serving.
Well, I like that, leading by serving. I also think there's a little bit of a personality component here because, John, you're Midwestern, and as we like to say, you're Midwestern nice, born in Michigan, living in Minnesota. You're nice. I was born in California and spent an awful long time in New York. I have no California laid backness, and I definitely have the New York bluntness. And also, as a CEO, I'm one of those rare birds who's a CEO and technology person. So I really kind of feel like if it makes it easier for you to package your ideas and your framing as service, that's cool. And I think that's really going to depend on whether you're an introvert versus an extrovert, whether you're Midwestern versus or from, say, Scandinavia versus from, Southern Europe. Side note on Southern Europe, a true story. Back in the day when they were trying to use noise suppression techniques to reduce the bandwidth that audio calls had, so that tells you how long ago it was, they found that noise suppression worked absolutely everywhere except in Italy because there was never any silent suppression. There was never any silence to be suppressed when you had two Italians talking to each other. And as somebody who is ethnically Italian and spent a lot of time in Italy, I can attest that that's the case. So yeah, silent suppression. Coming back to this, I think there's some of this is just a matter of your own personality, the culture of your organization, which we can talk about a bit, and also just your personal goals. But I would say that the biggest weakness that IT has right now is this failure to step up and lead the business. And I'll give you an example. About 10 years ago, as you might recall, the buzz was all about digital transformation. And it was, we're going to digitally transform the business. And I remember you and I were sitting there going, what the hell is this digital transformation? Because what were we before? Analog? We had these analog PCs? I don't think so. But what was going on was essentially we had spent almost 20 years forcing the CIO into this role of bean counter, often reporting into the CFO, and his or her job was basically do more with less each year. And technology being what it is, that was doable. So the CIO did that for 20 years. But the cost of that became apparent when the opportunities to transform how people worked away from the office using IoT and using mobile devices, and how people interacted and collaborated using all sorts of new collaboration technologies, and all these new things that were coming down the pike, up to and including AI. The CIO was not asked to bring any of this into the organization because he or she had been pegged as just the bean counter, the person who keeps the wires humming and the laptops fixed. And it didn't even occur to the CEO to turn to the CIO and say, hey, you want to lead our digital transformation project? And in fact, I recall one of our large clients, I remember sitting there in front of the person who had just been appointed CIO and saying to her, you need to be the head of digital transformation for your organization. And I remember she gave us the stink eye. And in all fairness, she was out of that organization in less than 2 years. It is what it is. So I guess what I'm saying is, although it's a nuance, the difference between sort of politely suggesting and kind of pounding the table and asserting, I think the current crop of CIOs are at some risk of not making it to whatever they're going to call digital transformation in the next iteration, which is always where the action is happening, because it's how technology transforms business. And I've kind of gone on for a while, John. Agree, disagree?
I agree to some extent with what you're saying, and especially about the politeness part, because yes, it's definitely a thing that a lot of folks in parts of the country other than the East Coast wrestle with. But it's also something.
See how polite that was right there.
It's also something that folks coming up through organizations in IT wrestle with in one of two ways. Either they get higher in the organization by being agreeable, by being flexible, by being politic, and working their way up, or they get further up in the organization by being very aggressive, by over-promising and then breaking other people's necks to deliver, and by being very aggressive up about what they're going to accomplish, requiring them to be very aggressive down in trying to accomplish it, even if it wasn't a great idea to begin with. But I think it can work really well for a CIO sitting at a table with CEO, CFO, et cetera, to lob hand grenades out onto the table. We see, these large language models are now capable of X, Y, and Z. What's your plan for saving the business when half of our operations become something, somebody can get for free from Google summaries? And drop the hand grenade in the CEO's lap or whoever's, and let them realize that they need more advance warning. Let them see that they need more expert guidance. Now, dropping hand grenades on the table in the middle of a board meeting or a leadership meeting can be a career limiting move. I remember having that conversation with my first CIO way back when I raised a really great point about why we shouldn't, as an organization, be doubling our technology spend in order to shift all of our stuff off these extraordinarily stable and reliable DEC VMS computers and onto those extremely expensive and nowhere near as reliable Oracle systems. And asking that question at one of the leadership meetings was close to being a career limiting move. Let me put it that way. My CIO was nice enough to say, you can ask me those questions anytime you want, but before these meetings in front of everybody else, not during them. I need to know in advance, so I have an answer ready.
Yeah, if you're planning to cut my proposed budget in half, don't do that in front of the CFO, okay?
Exactly. Yeah, even if it was all going to be wasted.
Funny,
yes.
Yeah. Exactly. Look, let me get the money, then we'll talk about how to spend it.
Let's pause the conversation for a word from sponsor Printer Logic. Remember how the future was going to be paperless? Yeah, not so much. And where there's paper, there's printers and print servers. If you're tired of dealing with print-related tickets, Printer Logic offers a simple, scalable, cloud-native, centralized, direct IP printing platform. Connect your print environment to easily manage front and back-end printing, integrate with EMR and ERP solutions, and get visibility and security. Say goodbye to print servers and reduce print tickets by up to 90% with Printer Logic. Find out more and get a free 30-day trial at printerlogic.com/packetpushers. That's printerlogic.com/packetpushers. And now back to the podcast.
When we were talking about this before the show, you had raised a very interesting point, which is that the one of the challenges that engineers and techies have is not just the whole introvert versus extrovert, assertive versus passive, whatever you want to call it, but also that it's a character trait of engineers to focus on the best solution with an unusual definition. And maybe you want to expand on that a little for the audience.
Oh, sure. I mean, anybody who's been in IT for more than, say, 5 years has probably been through at least one technology holy war. And if you've been in it as long as I have, you've been through dozens, reaching all the way back to which VT220 clone terminal was best, and on up through which version of Unix was best and which Windows systems was best for Unix workstations, and which text editor was best, which word processor was best, on up through which hypervisor was best, and all the way into the era of what's the best IaaS platform? Is it Azure? Is it AWS? No, it's got to be GCP. We do doubling down commitment on specific technologies and specific technology platforms really well, and some of that's just human nature. Everybody does that in whatever area of the world they operate in, whatever kind of stuff they do. And some of it's, I think, very specific to wanting to be an engineer or a techie in the first place, because there's something in there that's about getting to the guts, getting to the deep details. And the more you learn those, typically the more committed you get to one of the things you've dived really deeply into. And if something comes along that threatens it or competes with it, your first instinct, for a lot of us anyway, is loyalty to the stuff and the commitments you've made intellectually to the thing that you're using and how great it is. And that can blinker you to seeing the benefits of other things.
I'm going to jump in and say, I think you're right, but it's not just that. Mm-hmm. I think there's an element for many of us, especially those who have been or aspire to be architects, where you learn the principles of architecture and it's sort of half science, half art, and you look for inherent elegance in something because you understand. Yes. You've internalized the fact that downstream, a decision to do something in a certain way leaves open opportunities that you haven't yet explored, but that architecture is much more elegant than, say, a highly closed architecture. Or, and there's all these components, because sometimes being tightly closed is more appropriate for something that you need to be super robust or whatever. And we've, over the years, internalized that, even if we can't articulate it. And so we say, well, this way of using a pointer to go after that is much stronger because we can change the thing it points to, versus this thing is completely locked in, which makes it super robust. And we understand almost intuitively those kinds of decisions. And so we end up arguing in favor of the elegant and better design solution. I mean, I remember standing there and pounding the table and saying, you will pry my OS2 machine from my cold, dead hands. Because at the time, and I remember saying this as well, Windows is not an operating system. It's a GUI. It couldn't multitask. It couldn't multi-thread. It couldn't do anything that an actual operating system had to do, in my view. And yet, which one took over the world? Mm-hmm. And that's because what engineers and techies and architects value is not necessarily what the business values and what business users value. So that predisposes us to making maybe bad decisions from a business perspective, because we're going to be more heavily weighted by either, as you said, familiarity with something, or simply the aesthetic appreciation of a well-architected solution without acknowledging that it's not the right solution.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And it doesn't just apply in technology and engineering, but definitely it applies more to us, I think, than other fields, for sure. Can give you chapter and verse, if I scratch way back in my memory, as to why WordPerfect was a much better engineered word processor than MS Word. But yeah, it was irrelevant in the end, because people wanted to use Word and they wanted to use it for reasons that made great sense to them. And even, when they explained it, great sense to me, they valued different things than I valued, than my colleagues in the support organization valued. But the important thing was that they valued them because they made a difference to their ability to work and get their job done. So the trade-off for them was heavily weighted on the use and not the construction of the thing. And so, I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward, especially as we move into more and more of a SaaS world, and the user interface becomes the entire experience for a lot of folks. The elegance of the engineering behind the interface is not just hidden from them, but unrevealable. They'll never have a chance to peel back the covers and look.
Yikes. No. No. You never get, it's user interface. Elegance is always important. It has been important from the day, the iPod won over the Microsoft Zune. Anybody remember the Zune? Yes. I with a very clunky aesthetic realized, oh my gosh, this is much better designed than this Microsoft brick that I was wearing on my belt, which tells you how fashion conscious I was too. But no, here's where I'm going to push back a lot, because I think user interface is always important, but it never is more important than what's behind it. Simply, if you just look at AI, really all OpenAI did with ChatGPT was provide a user interface and make it available to everybody. That's it. Nothing else changed in the brave new world of LLMs. They still behaved exactly as they behaved before. The models still, could run hot, could run cold, could be tuned to this, that, or the other. The only thing that changed was opening it up to the users. So from that perspective, yes, the user interface matters, because now everybody from your gardener to your bus driver to your CEO is familiar with using ChatGPT. And that was a huge change that wouldn't have happened without the user interface. But nonetheless, the back end of how you tune the models, where you source your data, where where your data gets stored and what gets pushed out is still absolutely critical to the selection of which models you're going to use as an enterprise, I would maintain.
I think you're correct. And yet also that what you can know about that is what they tell you about it and not what you can discover for yourself.
That depends if you pull it in-house.
And even then, they only reveal to you the minimal number of things that you absolutely require knowledge of, and the architecture of everything else is not something you can uncover. You just don't have the option.
When we talk to large financial services firms, they're building their own models. They are keeping pace with the, Sam Altmans of the world, and they've got their own stuff running, and it may not be branded. So,
they're building it, though. Of course, they know the architecture.
Right. But the point is they're building it because the architecture matters, which was my main point. So, yeah, I guess I was taking a bit of an extreme stance to say, hey, IT should lead the business. But I will also say I've been hearing a lot lately from our clients saying, hey, how do I set up an office of the CTO and empower that CTO, whether that CTO is me or whether that CTO is somebody else? And at a practical level, I don't think the CTO should report to the CIO. I think they need to be peers, and the CTO needs a reasonable budget. And by reasonable, I mean not just the salaries of the 5 or 6 smart people that report into him or her. The CTO should actually be able to set up test labs, buy products, maybe not set up fully production things, but certainly advanced proof of concept. So the CTO should be positioned to sit down with a group within the organization and say, hey, you guys need X. I'm going to build you X. If that works, I'm going to bring in the CIO and we're going to expand it out to the rest of the company, or at least everyone who needs it. So at a practical level, I think.
I agree.
Go ahead.
I agree fully. They need a really explicit charter, too, so that everybody understands what they're there for, and that they're not just an advocate or an apostle to the CIO. They are there to serve the business, and they are there to serve the business specifically by being on the lookout for the opportunities that new technologies present at whatever level, whether it's opening up new markets or just radically changing the efficiencies of operations internally. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question, John, because I've been asking myself this as you were talking. Do you think the CIO and CTO can ever be the same person? And if so, under what circumstances?
For a large company, I typically would say no, just because there's too much to do. For a small company, perhaps if the temperament is right, because you need one of those black swan types who's both an innovative thinker and explorer in the technology space and a really good manager, basically, of operations with a real clear ability to focus down on the details of things actually getting done when they need to get done. A lot of folks just can't do that. Most folks just can't be both of those things. And in a big company, there's no chance because there'll be too much to do.
Define big company, because I'm thinking of one client in particular. How many people? How?
Golly, there's my Midwestern upbringing. I would say more than 1,000 people on staff, more than
IT
more
staff
than
or?
yeah.
Okay.
No, actually, I'm sorry, more than about 200 IT staff, depending on what kind of IT staff you're talking about. And depending on the size of the company overall, 200 IT staff in a 500 person company or 200 IT staff in a 10,000 person company. Yeah. Anyway, not a small business.
Well, and I would actually agree with your point about needing those two skills. And actually, I was talking to one of our clients and said, listen, you can succeed as a CTO in at least one of two ways, probably more. But if you are that person who just gets brilliant ideas from reading for 15 minutes over your morning coffee and just gets inspired in all sorts of different directions, but kind of doesn't manage super well, your job is to find a COO or equivalent chief of staff who just does all that management for you and you're joined at the hip with. And that person really helps guide you through the management stuff so you can focus on, the intellectual sparks. But the flip side is if you are that person, which our client actually is, that's totally okay too, because all you have to do is figure out a systematic way to get ideas, because you're not the person that's going to, generate them yourself reading the web, but lots of other people are. So find your good information sources. Get regular input from your information sources and pull them on a regular basis. And here your consistency and methodicalness will help. And then you focus on, okay, what does it take to bring one of these things to life?
I think there's a skill specifically there to unpack that a little bit, that the ability to take the, 50 great ideas that people have dropped in your inbox and prune that down to the 5 or 10 that you actually have resources to explore and pursue. That pruning capability is hugely important.
Yeah. And actually, I think someone like that who acknowledges they may not be the most brilliant visionary, they're not a Feynman, they're not Elon Musk is really more of a showman, but, not one of those people who is worshipped for his ability to come up with a million ideas before your first cup of coffee. Still, I think the person who does what you just said actually has an advantage, because no matter how brilliant any one person is, there are 8 billion of us. So the person who's getting more input from more sources and can organize them better is going to be ahead of the game no matter what. And they're going to beat the most brilliant person of all. But that's probably a topic for another podcast. I think
the wisdom of crowds. Yes.
Yes. We're coming close to the end of this one. So thank you very much for joining us today. If you've got feedback or follow up for us on this topic or any other topic on heavy strategy, send us a message. The message should go to packetpushers.net/FU. And that stands for follow up, packetpushers.net/FU. Yes. Thanks for the chuckle, John. We would love to hear from you. And in fact, we would love to put you on our show if that's possible. And if you have sent follow up and have not yet gotten a response, hang tight. We are in the process of digging through the backlog and getting back to everyone who's written us in the past couple of weeks. It's just been a busy couple weeks. So go ahead and send us that feedback or follow-up. And also at packetpushers.net, you will find the Network Break podcast, which helps you stay current on the latest tech news and what it means. Very relevant as you grapple with the issues of IT strategy and which way to head. There's also a whole lot more on that site, including other podcasts, our newsletters, and a job board and a very active Slack discussion group. So please head on over. And if you want to talk to John or me directly, please reach out to us at nemertes.com. That's Nemertes, nemertes.com. We look forward to hearing from you and talk to you on our next episode.